All right, we're going to talk about user acquisition, as we like to do on this track. My name is Dan Laughlin. I have actually spent the last 7 or so years on the monetization side of the business, and recently switched over to the user acquisition side. So this is quite fun for me, and I'm learning a lot, and I look to learn a lot from our panelists today. Here we go. Here's a little clicker. So today we're going to talk about both the fun and the pain of modern UA. With great tools and technology comes great responsibility. So we're going to touch on the challenges as well as the opportunities that come from everything that's going on in our space. So let's see here. Clicker, yes, there we go. So real quick about myself, my company. As I said, I'm Dan. I'm with a company called Loot Cakes. We're a newer entrant in the space. We actually have created a network of spenders, basically verified in-game spenders for mobile games. And so we're able to leverage that data to help user acquisition teams acquire more spenders. So if you're interested in looking into spender data and how we can help you there, come find me after the panel. All right, I'm going to introduce our panelists here. I don't like to let the panelists introduce themselves because they just go on forever and ever. So I'll try to do a decent job of this. And if I miss something, jump in or pitch your company better than I am or something like that, guys. All right, so first we've got Robert from Nexon, who just got off a plane and ran here from the airport. So just on time. You guys are probably all familiar with Nexon, based in Korea. Some big games, Domination's one that's well known, more recently like AXE and Darkness Rises. So he works out of the San Francisco or Emeryville location there. But Robert's a bit of a global man. He speaks Mandarin, which I do not. He also worked at Gameloft and lived in China for a while. And this is fun. If you're interested in finding your way to Robert's heart professionally, do see the end of his LinkedIn profile in his description. He will tell you how to do that. I'll leave it at that. All right, Loukas from Minimob, one of our sponsors here today, over there. Yeah, there we go. All right, so I met Loukas actually in Vegas a few weeks ago, and he delivered for me what I needed most at that exact moment, which was a spicy margarita, which I was very happy to have. But Loukas is also another international man of mystery, lives in Athens, but yet runs the U.S. operations for Minimob, so probably on planes a lot. Also went to school in London. And if you're not familiar with Minimob, he can describe it better than I, but DSP, all sorts of different solutions like a white label ad network solution. He can tell you a bit more about that in a bit. All right, Faith is our local representative. Yay! All right, so you're probably all familiar with DoubleDown, huge in the casino game space. Faith is part of a local kind of big fish alumni UA mafia, kind of runs the town around here. So a lot of experience here in Seattle doing user acquisition. Previously was in the affiliate space with Expedia and a few other spots. So anyone with affiliate marketing knowledge, be a little afraid of. She's got all the tricks. All right, and finally, Jami from Lab Cave, another sponsor here today. So I first met Jami many years ago when she was at DDM, an agency in the gaming space, and more recently she's moved over to Madrid and learning Spanish and traveling the world. If your picture on LinkedIn of your badges that you've collected since just being at Lab Cave or any occasion, she's been to every single conference in the gaming space in the last 18 months. All right. So in Lab Cave, if you're not familiar, so both a game publisher, some pretty popular casual titles, but also a service provider, so in the ASO space and more recently in monetization on the mediation side of things. So Jami can tell you more about that in a second as well. All right. So we're going to dive into some questions here. I have pre-asked them these questions. I'm going to throw their answers up on the screen. In most cases, I got answers from several of them so that we can kind of get to the meat of things really quickly. And, if you've got a question in real time, just blurt it out because, by the time we get to the end, who's going to remember what we talked about, 20 minutes before that. So just go for it. All right, first question. This is the high-level one. All right, kind of best of times, worst of times type thing. right now there's so many tools and technology and like endless amounts of data about UA. If you think back to where we were 5 or 7 years ago, it's crazy to think of what we did without all this data back in that time. But also, like I said, lots of responsibility with this data, with GDPR and all that. So is today the best or the worst, or the easiest or the hardest time to be in UA? And nobody took the bait on this. They all opted it to it's neither, it's both. I guess no one wants to be on record saying it's an easy time to do their job. But I'll let you guys dive in. Who said that it is neither hard or easy right now?
That was probably me. So the challenge that we have now is that the space is very, very crowded, and especially for publishers who are only in one particular category, like DoubleDown is in the casino space, and I feel like the barrier for entry for mobile games is getting lower to a certain extent, so there's just a lot more competition, but we have more tools which can make it somewhat easier to do UA. We know a lot more about how UA works, how the consumer is looking for things, and so I think in that way, it's got its challenges, but I don't feel like it's either of them.
Anyone else care to comment?
Just to kind of dovetail on that, it is really both the easiest and the hardest time, as you've kind of touched upon. We have better access to tools and better access to segmentation and the ability to identify the right users at every point than we've ever had in the history of marketing as a discipline. However, there are so much competition and so many fraudulent actors and so many pitfalls and just an amazing array of different audiences to target that make it also an extremely difficult time for user acquisition.
All right, well, we'll jump on to the next one, which is right after, very much aligned with the difficult part. So GDPR coming up on its 1-year anniversary. Happy birthday, GDPR. So question here is this still a thing for you every day that you're dealing with, that you're paying lawyers for? Or is it kind of, okay, we set it and forget it, this has all kind of been figured out? What is the tax on your business today?
I would say for our team, in terms of GDPR, it's making sure that contracts are properly set up so that we are addressing the needs of GDPR. And for us, it's still ongoing because while we do ask for permission, and those pieces are all within your email system, there's confusion among if I get a business card at a trade show. Can someone else on my team talk to you? Can we send you a newsletter? I know that there's opt-out reasons, but which makes it, we can obviously delete you from our system. But in terms of legality, just making sure that each and every step and everything that our team is trying to implement, that we're keeping GDPR in mind, including new tools coming on board, making sure that GDPR has been thought about externally, and then additionally, how do we incorporate that inside our own team?
Loukas, as a service provider, what's your take on this?
Well, I think that as long as you have a good lawyer on payroll and just be careful and making sure that they do their job, I think we're pretty covered in terms of the GDPR. Like in the beginning, it was a big issue for us. Like we had to make sure that we're compliant, and when are we, and like when, as you mentioned, when we're not compliant. But a year later, I think, like as far as I know, we had no more complaints, and everything is all right.
I guess, Robert, with Nexon being a very global business, is this something that you're dealing with? And I know you touch on contracts and
it's definitely delayed the onboarding speed of contracts. There are fewer partners now that we're able to work with just because there's a big bottleneck. DPAs and getting all the paperwork. Everybody wants to sign on their own paperwork, and we want to sign on our own as well. So, of course, it takes twice, 3 times, 4 times as long to sign anything.
Fun stuff. So last I think, relatively negative topic there. Along the same lines, how do you actually, mechanically share data with partners while keeping these lawyers happy? and we got some interesting answers here about, the MMP being, mobile measurement partners, and then about data security tools. I was actually curious, if someone wants to say who said the right tools to keep data secure, are you using like third-party systems just dedicated to data sharing?
I don't know who said that. That wasn't me. But I can tell you in terms of the tools that we've used for keeping data safe, we do a lot of research before we implement something that's going to hold any data, external tool-wise, making sure that they've implemented the proper security. So the research on, again, the tool is incredibly important.
Anyone else want to touch on this one at all? Or we want to run away from this as fast as possible? All right, we'll do that. All right, here we go. DSPs and networks in the UA space, and maybe Loukas, I'll point at you for this one since you're in that space directly. The big thing in this space is always Google and Facebook and their share. How do you guys think about kind of biting at those heels, and what do you do to try to kind of gain back some of that share? Because it doesn't take a lot of their share to be very big for you. So how do you guys think about that right now?
Well, first of all, I want to say that although like Google and Facebook cover like 95% of the world traffic, the DSPs actually have a great reach on both of them. And at the same time with DSPs, I think it's more personal than Facebook and Google. Like, it's not just a big corporation. Like, us, where our office is, you can walk in any day, we're not as big. Like, so you can't fight Facebook or Google if you want, but we have much more scale, so it's easier to talk with us and coordinate with us. And at the same time, I think a lot of DSPs right now offer some targeting that Facebook and Google are now catching up and focusing more on that, and that's why we see them creating now the lookalikes, as you mentioned, and we're going to talk about later on more, and give you more options as to compete with them.
What about from the gaming side, as a developer?
It is difficult to take, marketing budget share from Facebook and Google because of the level of segmentation that those platforms Facebook gives you. The real challenge here is one in consistency and traffic quality. Most networks have challenges in finding that balance between scale and the right audience for an audience. That is to say, like a game or a product, and in doing so, they kind of fill in a whole bunch of junk media. The sort of like cheetah of the world. Like, it's kind of stuffed in there.
And I would also say that it's for us when we look at who our partners are, and we would love to do more with ad networks and DSPs, but it is an issue of consistency and quality, and it's also a little bit of an issue of being a trusted partner. And for all that there are challenges in dealing with Google and Facebook, they tend to be the only partners that come back to us and say, hey, we're giving you a credit because this technology piece broke, or this, you got traffic from this and you shouldn't have. In the case of DSPs and ad networks, it's incumbent on us as publishers to figure out if there's fraud and to go to them and prove to them. And we'll still have those, we'll still say, here are 5 metrics where it's very clear that this is not quality that you sent us. And suddenly those metrics will come back to normal. And we'll be like, okay, well, that's really odd. Why did that happen? Oh, we don't know why that happened. That kind of creates some questions. And so that's part of the challenge in how to other channels, media channels grow is, be more upfront. If something happens in the network, tell us. Don't wait for us to figure it out.
That's actually one of the lessons I give to every new account manager, and that works for me, is always be one step ahead of the advertisers. If you make a mistake or if something goes wrong, then let the advertiser know first, because either way he's going to find out. It's better to find out from you and tell him, hey, that's on us, or hey, we made a mistake, let us figure out what happened, that him coming to you and telling you, hey, you made a mistake, what's going on, and losing the account once and for all. Actually, this is one, and I was discussing that with some account managers last week, because initiation, that's what I told them, you guys are great at your job, but to be good and great. The difference is being always one step ahead.
That makes sense. All right, next question. Now, along the same lines, actually, what should developers look for when they're evaluating a new UA partner? And maybe, Robert, if you want to jump into this one from the developer side, and obviously with Jami and Loukas here as service providers, they can kind of offer the counterpoint as well as far as what they think that developers should be looking for as well in partners. So
the first and foremost thing that will make or break my decision to work with a new partner is whether or not they have proprietary inventory. Like if it's wholly owned and internal and there's no other way to buy it. Outside of that, technology is the next step, and then the reputation. Really, it kind of is a step ladder in that way.
I mean, in terms of looking at partners, I mean, a lot of it is, the responsiveness is important, because if I need to ask you a question or I have something I want to know, if at the stage while I'm deciding you can't get back to me, then at the stage in which I've paid, I'm a little concerned. And I know that as someone who works at a service team, and knowing that the sales team is different than the team that's also providing the work, if the sales team isn't responsive, it makes me concerned about what I'm going to find from the rest of the team, because the sales team is designed to be responsive.
Anything else to add? Anyone? Faith?
I would also add that if you're a media source or an ad network or a DSP, be able to articulate what makes you different. We have questionnaires we send out to people who want to partner with us, and the answers I get back are so cookie cutter that you would never be able to guess. Like if I gave you 10 names and 10 questionnaires, like which ones go with any of them. They all say the exact same things. So there's we said earlier, it's one of the most difficult times because there's a lot of competition in our ecospace in terms of publishers. There's also a lot of competition in terms of different media channels, and so it's up to media channels to be able to talk about why they're different than any other. Literally, I've literally seen spreadsheets with 400 or 500 different networks you could partner with. So you need to be able to stand out.
All right, let's get into some tactical stuff here. ASO. So, everyone knows that App Store featuring has become kind of a less of an important factor, not as much impact there. So ASO is more important than ever. I asked the crew here what are some of the latest things, and got varied responses. In some cases, heard that it's not really about what's latest. These are the same tried and true things. It's just that you need to be more and more diligent about how you work on it. And Jami, this is an area where your company does a lot of work. You want to start?
Sure. For us, it's a lot of testing. You can look at your competition and you can see what it is they're doing. You can look and see, what's going on around you. But realistically, once you kind of assess that, you need to then kind of dive in. And the A/B testing that Google allows is incredible. We also, looking at ASO is a tool for helping your conversion rate as well, because as users are coming to your page, you want them to not only visit, but you want them to install. And so looking at that tap-through rate and how can we assess that. So for us, what we see is the most useful there are your creatives. It is, when people are looking for a game, maybe they find your game because you've got proper keyword usage, but then they look at your icon and maybe it's just not appealing to them. Your game could be exactly what they're looking for, but they're not seeing your page as appealing. And realistically, looking at ASO, we all know that SEO is so important for your website, and if someone's going to want to work with you and you don't have a website that clearly says what you do, they're going to move on. There's plenty of other options out there. And so for us, when we focus on ASO, we're focusing on what it is that, what makes your game different and how can you appeal to the users that are looking for you. So having that really clear-cut page that is well-defined, you have, on Google Play, obviously, it's looking at the descriptions and how you are able to rank for keywords, and then looking on iOS for how are you using the character space that's allotted to you. There's a lot you can do with the little bits that are given to you. It's pretty amazing what the teams are able to do with that little bit of space.
Yep. Go for it. it out. I'll repeat it for everyone.
Oh, sorry, I was just curious, how do you do A/B tests or other types of testing in iOS?
So on iOS, you can use different tools. So for example, our team uses split metrics when we want to do specific iOS testing. We know that users are different on iOS, but we also know that you can only update on iOS when you update a build. So it's something where you can only update it every 30 days or so. As us as a third party, we have to work with our clients to be able to make the iOS updates. So you can't make them as often, as opposed to Google Play, where you can make tests there within the console constantly. So some of the testing, if our client does not wish to use split metrics, because it obviously comes with needing the additional user acquisition costs, is to be able to apply things that we've seen work on Google Play and just see what happens on iOS. Does it apply properly? Lots of times it does. There are specific instances where it doesn't work, but being agile enough to make those changes. So I guess in answer to your question, there's third-party tools that help you with iOS.
I also want to say, if you can, as UA, if you can get involved in the ASO process in soft launch or even before, it's really helpful, especially if the product teams are willing to partner with you. When I was working on ASO at Big Fish, we would get a chance when they were bringing out new games to talk about, like, what do you want the title to be, and how is that going to impact what you rank for in the App Store and the Play Store, and really trying to help communicate, like, it's all about practicality. It's all about reflecting what the game is and what the user is searching for, and it's not aspirational. I mean, I remember I had a conversation once where they were like, well, this is a mid-core game, so we want people who used to play Magic, and we want people who play Clash of Clans, we want people who play Clash Royale, and I'm like, but your game's nothing like that, and you have none of those descriptors anywhere in the game, anywhere in the title, anywhere in the subtitle, and so trying to rank on those for keywords isn't going to be useful because there's no connection to the game. So getting them to being, it's not aspirational, it's really nuts and bolts. What are people looking for these keywords, and does your game fit it?
Cool. All right, we're going to move on to another tactical question here. And Jami, you mentioned creatives. Something I've been more exposed to recently is just how many offerings there are to help with finding the best creatives and creating the best creatives for user acquisition. Like on Facebook, there's the dynamic creative optimization tool. Different networks and systems and DSPs and everybody are offering different things. Then you've got tools like Bidalgo that can kind of stitch together different variations. And I'm just thinking, as a developer, and maybe Robert, you can touch on this and see what you guys do at Nexon, how do you manage all of this? There's a million creatives flying around. You've got all these different platforms doing different things. How do you think about it holistically?
The short answer is that we don't really think about it holistically. We think about it as a bunch of little compartments. So we work with a digital asset manager, a DAM, that is curated and managed by the creative team, which is large. Big companies have really large teams, but there's not like one flow from one end to the other. And then once it hits the networks, everybody has their own special sauce that they want to try to leverage.
So different creatives might actually perform better on one network or one platform
or
than
in different
another.
countries or on different platforms.
Sure.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, the different countries, creatives, obviously, I mean, artwork is different in Japan than it is in Madrid or in Spain. Like, it's just a completely different set of creatives that are necessary. And looking at how Google allows you to have a different icon, and that's incredibly important in terms of, looking at that. But for our team, in order to manage all of this, we have project managers that are required to keep up on all of that and make sure internally that everything is coming up as it needs to. And the nice thing for us by having that project manager, it means if there's an issue, we can go to one person and kind of address that issue, who then can address those things with the team. So it allows us to have more on-point meetings that are faster, and then we can move on and make the changes necessary.
And Loukas, as a service provider in this space, how do you work with clients on the creative side? Or anything goes? Give us everything you've got, or do you help them kind of curate?
Well, they always ask us if we have a creative team on our side, and we say yes, but we both know that you won't need it because every every app developer and like big companies like Nexon and DoubleDown, especially like DoubleDown has to do with casinos, so the special keywords cannot say some words in the ads. So everyone prefers to use their creatives, and so we just use the creatives we're given. But what we do is encourage our advertisers to change the creatives often and try as many creatives as possible, but at the same time, we just have to listen to them and do as they ask us. Because it is an issue like the same with GDPR, you don't want to make mistakes. The same thing with the creatives, you don't want to make a mistake. So we try to do everything possible to keep the advertiser happy, and having us make the creatives is another process, a step that you might make a mistake. So we try to avoid that as much as possible. We only use our creative team usually to change, to translate, like if they want a different language, and even then we have them sign a paper saying if there's something wrong there in the translation, it's not our fault.
Yes, a lot can go wrong there. All right, next topic, lookalike audiences. So in the new business that I've been working in, we're taking spenders and the email addresses and the data related to the spenders, throwing them into Facebook and creating lookalike audiences that are driven from the spender data. And it's proven to be really powerful, and I'm really impressed with the technology from Facebook that they can find the signal, if you will, between say a couple thousand people and then go find you 1 million people that are going to look the most like them. So we're kind of creating and sharing those audiences with our partners, and it looks like Google's going to be doing more of this and is kind of rolling that out. And I guess the question is, and Oscar mentioned this in his last talk, this is a powerful model, probably not going away, though we have one dissenting opinion here, which is pretty interesting about GDPR. Curious, do we think that lookalikes will be kind of the go-to way of building audiences going forward, and will all types of companies be building and leveraging these? And maybe from Loukas' perspective, from a DSP, how do you guys think about lookalikes? And because it's definitely magical technology, but it's science and data science that anyone can get after if they have the right people and the right data. So how do you guys think about it?
So actually, I'm impressed with the lookalikes and how they work for Facebook, and I looked into it a little bit now. As you said, Google is launching it on our side. What really is a lookalike, and how do you find out what's a lookalike? So it's basically some traits in the users that basically do well in your app. So with targeting, having many targeting options as a DSP, targeting can be social behavior, or can be income, or like thousands of things you can have targeting. So basically you can't create lookalikes in a sense using a DSP, because a lookalike has certain traits, so you can target these certain traits in the DSP. Although you mentioned like you can have like 1 million people, and I think the more specific you are and the smaller the group you focus on, I think you have the higher chances to getting a better better back for your money, like a better return on your money.
Any other perspectives on the lookalike market?
I think every couple of years, lookalikes become kind of the big next thing that is going to be the game changer, and then everybody except Facebook realizes that they're actually kind of difficult to make and stops talking about it for a couple of years.
They do have a unique set of data to work with at Facebook. Right?
I have a question for given that there's lookalikes for re-engagement, and there is a finite population of people in the world and on the internet, everything I'm hearing about strategy seems to be a silo. How important is the idea that everything is cumulative, and there should be a relationship between how you talk to the exact same person in 4 different places?
You're talking about like brand strategy.
Yeah, or even just the decision, even what goes into the creative, yes, but also what you pay for in terms of reach on Facebook versus, you're hitting the same people across the universe.
Yeah, you are hitting the same people across everything, but there's different technological ways to address that media. There's simple waterfall mechanics that work in the networks, and the networks are full of a lot of other inventory that you're not necessarily trying to buy. Whereas with Facebook, there's kind of a gravity that falls on that one user that is going to come in and drop $500, and that one impression is going to cost a lot more than everything else, and so they know that that's likely, so they're going to find a way to charge for that in a way that is acceptable for you. But I guess the question of why would you address them in all four different places is because at some point you're likely to get a conversion, but you don't know when that's going to happen. It's just a little spin of a roulette wheel over and over again.
I think too that's why creative differs between the media channels you're using. And so when we look at creative, we look at what performs best for an ad network versus what performs best for social media. We try to think about what is the user doing when they're seeing that piece of media or a piece of creative. So usually in a game, they're doing something very different than if they're on Facebook or if they're on YouTube or if they're doing a search. So keeping that in mind, like what's the best experience you can provide for whatever their intention is when they see that piece of creative is helpful, right? It lets you build for the right experience.
All right, we'll skip ahead to the last question here. Any piece of advice that you guys have to those companies and people new in the UA space entering into this crazy world right now?
I think I think testing is incredibly important, but I also think that when you find something that works, you can't assume it will continue to work. I think that you're constantly addressing new users, there's new cohorts happening, there's new people coming in and seeing your ad, and creatives that work for a game that within the RPG space, it doesn't mean that if your game is an RPG that exact same thing will work. You really just need to make sure that you learn from your mistakes and your successes, and that you adjust this is a market that changes constantly. I think every 6 months something new is coming up here, and that you have to be ready for those changes and just keep up on what's happening and watch your data.
I feel like networking is really useful and meeting with other people in the UA space. And it is important to realize that what works for one of your competitors might not work for you, or what works for somebody who's in a different category might not work for you. But it's good to have all that knowledge so that when it comes time, you can apply your own strategies to it. And also, again, it's kind of a small eco space. And when we talk about what are you looking for in partners, and Robert mentioned reputation. So being able to talk to other people and learn from their experiences about different ad networks and channels and things like that, I think, is really useful as well. It can keep you from making mistakes.
I think you need to keep a close eye on what your target audience is and what the kind of media that you're buying is. Networks that give you site-level transparency are really helpful for this purpose. I wrote in there, be aware of hyper-casual, which is a little glib, but what I mean to say is that there's a rather small actual gaming audience. It's maybe 3 or 5 million people in the US that really play mobile games in the mid-core and core space. That has changed radically over the course of the last couple of years with the advent of hyper-casual. So now there's tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people in the US that are playing games on their phones, but it's not quite the same experience, and the people who you're ostensibly paying a nominal CPI for are not as familiar with core gaming concepts as the older audience that is maybe more established.
Actually, I'm gonna use something someone told me last week at the MAU, and he told me if it looks too good to be true, then it probably it is. And that's a very good piece of advice, because right now the way the market has evolved, in the beginning the fraud was like bots and all this stuff, but now the fraud right now in the market is not looking like bad traffic. Actually, the best type of fraud I've seen is looking like great traffic. So if I see a source with amazing traffic, I would make sure I look over it again and again until it's foolproof.
That's a good one. All right, we got a few minutes left. We'll turn it over to questions. Anyone have anything for the crew here? Yes.
Hi, I'm Christy from Lookas. We talked about social versus programmatic. I'm curious, and we talked a little bit about the creative strategy and how it differs. How do your KPIs differ from programmatic to social channels? If you do.
There's quite a big difference between those two, but a lot of it comes down to the way in which you're addressing the media. By and large, programmatic is bought on display, and it's interstitial, so it's like pop-ups. So you have a lot more impressions and a lot fewer clicks and a lot fewer installs in a broad sense. So the creative conversion is much lower, and because the CPMs are also lower, usually you can kind of ride the line between that. But the part that most DSPs don't really take into account is what's happening after the install. They're really focused on that impression, click, install funnel. Whereas with the social channels, they're pretty squarely focused at the post-install level at this point. So just in broad terms, social will almost always look better than programmatic right now.
I think it's an issue of consistency as well, which is something you brought up. It's social tends to have a fairly steady KPIs across the months, and with programmatic and networks, some months are really good, some months are not really good, and it's very difficult to predict, and so and it's part of the challenge is like, what do you do when things are not going well? And I think that comes back to, how do DSPs compete with Facebook or any of the social media when they have so much more data on the customer, and they're able to not have the high highs and the low lows that you get with programmatic, because programmatic's kind of shooting off everywhere and hoping that they hit something.
Other questions? We're good? All right. Well, thank you to the panelists. Thank you all for coming.